Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains in the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. And today, we are going to discuss an incident where a railway was trying to be built, and it just couldn't be because two lions decided they were gonna eat people. Like a lot of people. Because they wanted to. This is the story of the Tsavo Man-Eaters. Tsavo is a small region in Kenya, Africa. So, that would explain the lions already. But the context for building a railway there requires a bit more in-depth detail. The year was 1898, and at that time the area was actually under the rule of the British Empire. We were still back in the colonial days of the UK, and it was decided that they wanted really badly to build a railroad in the region. It would eventually go on to be known as the Kenya-Uganda Railway, sometimes just the Uganda Railway, which is a meter gauge railway that lasted from 1895 to 1929. The lines that were once a part of it are now under the operation of Kenya Railways Corporation and Uganda Railways Corporation. But back then the British were still in charge. And in their defense, in this context, they actually had a really good reason for wanting the railway. See, this region of Africa actually had a huge problem with slavery. Due to the undeveloped nature of the area, people would be enslaved for the sole purpose of helping to transport goods. The thought was, if a railway was put in place, it would completely cut out the need for slave labor for this exact purpose, and it would help bring the area into a more modern age. So there was a legitimately good reason for doing this. But as you may realize, Africa is, well, it's Africa. It has some of the largest land-dwelling animals around, and some of the most dangerous. It's hot, wild. Constructing a railway in these types of conditions is definitely not going to be an easy task. This particular set of line was meant to link Uganda with the Indian Ocean at Kilindini Harbor. And to be honest, most of that line went down without much of a problem. But things got held up when they had to build a bridge over the Tsavo River. The area around where they were building the bridge became an encampment that spread over 8 miles to accommodate the many workers that were constructing the bridge. Most of these workers actually weren't locals. They were actually Indian workers. See, back then, Britain still had control of India too, and they'd already built plenty of railways over there. Many of these workers had experience building railways, so the British thought it made sense to bring in many of them, since the local workers that they did employ some of didn't have any experience laying railway lines. And not only would the Indian workers bring experienced labor to the mixture, but they could help train the locals to do it in the future. This part of the project was actually being led by John Henry Patterson, who is a man I could easily make an entire video about, because he wound up doing a lot. He was an Irish member of the British Army. He was also a hunter and an author. And he showed up to the site just days before things started getting really scary. Workers just started vanishing. They were just gone. They had been in their tents and suddenly they weren't there anymore. And that was really weird. Now, the notion of a few workers perhaps just leaving the site wasn't unheard of, but the number kept increasing, and it was with disturbing regularity. Eventually it was realized that the camp was being stalked by 2 male lions. Neither one had a mane we typically associate with male lions, but in that region in Africa it's actually known for some males not to have manes, or very small manes. Either way, these 2 lions suddenly decided, for whatever reason, that humans were delicious. And for the next 9 months, they routinely stalked the campsite and evaded any attempts to get rid of them. At their height, they would show up daily, and the workers built campfires and fences. Some of the fences were even made out of whistling thorn trees around the camp to keep the lions away, but nothing worked. They would either jump over or crawl through the thorn fences, ignore the fires entirely, and they were stealthy. Very stealthy. Half the time, someone would be taken without anyone realizing they were gone until the screaming started. The workers decided to name the lions the Ghost and the Darkness, which I love both those names. I am totally on board for that. The attacks grew worse and worse, and eventually hundreds of the workers were just like, you know what? No. And they fled the area, which completely shut down construction on the bridge. Colonial officials were severely annoyed with the lack of progress, wondering why 2 lions were causing such a hindrance for the mighty British Empire. District Officer Mr. Whitehead showed up to investigate, and he himself narrowly escaped being killed by one of the lions right after arriving. His poor assistant, whose name was Abdullah, wound up killed in this attack. Mr. Whitehead only got away with 4 claw lacerations running down his back. The lions would not let up, so J.H. Patterson took matters into his own hands. With reinforcements from colonial officials, Patterson began to set traps and tried several times to ambush the lions from a tree. Repeatedly, this was unsuccessful for a variety of reasons. One time his gun just straight up misfired, so that was good. But by the 9th of December, 1898, he shot the first lion. 20 days after that, he found the second, and also shot it. With the man-eaters killed, it was safe to resume work on the bridge, and it was completed, and the railway was put into operation. But questions still loomed. Lions don't usually attack people. They can be territorial, but generally speaking, they don't see human beings as food. Why had these two been different? Because these weren't just a bunch of flukes or them being territorial. These were regular, planned, stealthy attacks. They were hunting people. Well, it probably came down to a few factors. For one thing, these were 2 male lions, left alone. Normally lions operate in a pride, and the females do the hunting. These 2 probably didn't have a pride, so they had to get food by themselves. Now that alone is pretty difficult for them, but the other problem is that there was an outbreak of rinderpest, which is a viral cattle plague that severely reduced the population of many of the animals the lions would normally prey on. As a result, in order to avoid starvation, they would have to look for alternate food sources. The lions may have also been accustomed to the slave trade. They may have found dead humans on the Tsavo River crossing, as illegal slave caravans would cross there pretty regularly. Therefore, they could have acquired a taste for human meat from that. Modern science also suggests one of the lions may have had a tooth infection, making it difficult to chew. The thing about humans compared to the animals that lions usually hunt is that we are soft and squishy. Much easier on the jaw. But it really is anybody's guess. Maybe they just hated our stupid faces for putting a rail line through their home. I guess I kinda get that. The lions were skinned, and Patterson actually kept them for 25 years as floor rugs. Eventually, though, he willingly sold them to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, Illinois, for the sum of $5,000. The skins were restored as best they could, and actually put on permanent display for public viewing. This also allowed the Field Museum to do some research into the lions' actual diets by using chemical analysis. Looking at their isotopic signature, they were able to determine that the lions likely ate, between the 2 of them, about 35 people. Patterson actually said that the lions killed about 135 people, but modern science disagrees. But many people dispute both claims. It's not unlikely that Patterson exaggerated a bit. 35 isn't exactly a small amount of people for the lions to be eating, but over the course of that many months, they would have killed a lot more, because the research doesn't take into account the victims that the lions killed, but didn't actually eat. Also, the diets of the victims would have also affected this chemical readout. Some of the victims would have been Hindus, as they were from India, and they may have had a vegetarian diet, and that would produce results more typical of what we would consider a regular herbivore, not a human being. Either way, though, the point is, the lions killed a lot of people, and terrified them at the same time. It's a little hard for me to blame them, though. After all, they were just hungry. They're predators, doing what they do. And in retrospect, it is slightly amusing, though tragic, as the British Empire, at one of the high points of their colonial power, was completely held up by 2 very, very hungry lions. And And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Somedude267, Brightline Blue, Joshua Long, Ohio Trucker 1, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Arthur Roy, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mr. Black Rose Tribal Typhoon, Master of None, Josh Johnson, and Lock Kraken. Till next time, this is Darkness at Abidualaphon. Farewell.